It's important to get a little nostalgic every once in a while, so this is part 2 of my ongoing series talking about specific games that I think need to be remade. Now, there's always a conversation out there about how we need more new games and stuff. People are tired of too many remakes and remasters, and I get that, but there are certain games that I want to talk about that I do think deserve to be either completely remade from the ground up, like with a fresh new spin, or just gently remade or remastered or something. Just games that I think need to be re-exposed again. Re-exposed again? So I'll link the other videos where I talk about other games that I want to see remade. If you wanted to hear me talk about some other old game and I didn't mention it here, go check out those. But I got 5 games today, and the first one specifically is Legacy of Kane Blood Omen. This is the original Legacy of Kane game that I played on the original PlayStation. The game released in 1996, so it's old as hell, and I think for a lot of people, they were exposed to the whole Legacy of Kane thing through Soul Reaver games. But I think, especially now with this property being owned by a company that may eventually revive it, I think it's good to start from the beginning, the humble beginnings of the series, but one that I really like just for its gothic vampire vibe. And it's also completely different than the rest of the games in the series because it's more of an isometric top-down thing. It's definitely not perfect. I know for most people it's not their favorite in this series. Mine personally it is, just because it's a little different, but I think it can be brought up into a cool new thing, specifically because, and I've talked about this before in other videos, but Kane is such a cool character. Kane and just like his vampire-ness, just the way they approach it is very unique and just makes for a cool, iconic, memorable thing. Also, just can't help but love a story about somebody becoming a vampire. But, you know, it's the first little baby step into what would eventually become this big, crazy world that they built. With all of this cool lore and stuff, which eventually would go on to really hook people and make them fall in love with Nosgoth, Raziel, stuff like that. I don't know, the first one was just like a weird one, the different one, and I think it should get freshened up and put out again. There's potential there to like really double down on its mood and atmosphere, and then kind of start from there and build this new cohesive, you know, full proper representation of these games. Because like I said, Embracer has them now. They've been talking big shit about remaking a lot of their franchises, and I expect them to maybe eventually go for this one. I just hope they do it right, man, because there's a lot of potential. They could either just straight up make a new game, which you know a lot of people would want, but if they're trying to make a bunch of money, maybe it would be kind of rebirthing the whole franchise. I don't know, but don't forget the original Legacy of Kane Blood Omen. Next up, to go completely left field in a completely different direction, Def Jam. Remember the Def Jam games? I'm talking specifically like Def Jam Vendetta, the original one, and Def Jam Fight for New York. Incredible games for a variety of reasons. Yes, if you look at them now, completely dated with some of the hip-hop artists they have in the roster, but still, it made for a really cool pop culture thing, seeing a lot of our favorite rappers square off against one another in games built with some pretty decent fighting / wrestling mechanics. The original Vendetta had way more of like a traditional wrestling vibe to it, but all of the games in this series, I'd argue, definitely have some merits in their gameplay, and it's just like such a weird thing to have even happened that I would just love to see them pull that off today. Now, I'm sure a lot of you guys, and even me, will argue like, yeah, maybe some of the more modern hip hop and rap artists are not as compelling or over the top characters as in the old days, but there are definitely some out there for sure that I think would fit right in. I think this series, like a remake or a reboot type thing, actually has a lot of potential for being one of the few real compelling. Like, how many games do you play where it's like, you know, or movies you see where, you know, it's like the new generation comes up with the old characters and then they pass the torch, right? I think it's like 50-50 sometimes. Movies and video games or anything really will pull that off. Sometimes it's a hit, sometimes it's not. But I think the Def Jam games have a good way of doing that with celebrating now, I guess, older rappers and hip hop artists from the, you know, the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, actually, you know, kind of working with and actually standing alongside some of the new, you know, worthy modern artists. And it can make for a cool thing. I think it's a good way to actually visually, metaphorically, whatever, have a torch passed from one generation or group of artists of a genre to another in just like a fun, weird way where they all punch each other. I don't know, like, am I crazy that these games even existed? Like, they are an absolute miracle. And some of the people that would show up in them were like so weird. Henry Rollins was in one, but then like, oh man, just like getting so excited about some of those characters, like, you know, DMX showing up. I could go on and on about the whole roster. I mean, honestly, EA, I believe was it. They kept this thing going for a while. They kept trying. So I would love to, obviously I'd love to see maybe a different company try and bring it back, but you know, there is something there. And I mean, Def Jam on their social media accounts had teased stuff a while back that ultimately amounted to nothing. But I think in terms of like crossing a cool bridge between older hip hop that like I grew up loving and some of the newer stuff where I only like some of it, I think there could be something cool here. They even in those games, like they even came up with stories. Like what would the story be for a new one or like a remake or something? I have no idea, but I want to see them try. Crazier things have happened. Hey, now before we keep going, just know that this video is sponsored by Established Titles. Have you ever wanted to be a lord or a lady? Well, now you can't. Ooh, nope, doesn't fit. Ugh. Now you officially can. This is a project actually based on a historic Scottish custom where landowners are referred to as lairds, or lords in English. So if you purchase a title pack, it gives you at least 1 square foot of dedicated land on a private estate in Scotland. Look, it even comes with this cool certificate. You know where your land is. I put Lord Jake, player of games, he of pizza. You can put whatever you want. And this makes you a lord or lady. No joke. If you want to get wild, you can even officially change your name on your credit card or plane tickets or even get it on your dating profiles, which seems like the worst idea and the best idea. The best part about this though is that it is also a genuinely fun way to preserve the natural woodlands of Scotland. Established Titles actually plants a tree with every order, and they work with global charities One Tree Planted and Trees for the Future to support the global reforestation efforts. And the first 200 people to get a title pack with my link below will essentially get a plot next to or near mine, so we can start our own little Jake Baldino kingdom if you want. Really, my favorite thing about this is that it's just a good last-minute gift. Believe it or not, Established Titles is running a massive Black Friday sale right now, and if you use my code ONJAKE, you can get an additional 10% off. So head to establishedtitles.com/OnJake to get your gifts and help support this channel. And thanks again to them for sponsoring this video. Next up, we're gonna go older. We're gonna go way back and talk about Rampage. I would love to see a new Rampage game. I would love to see that series completely remade, reborn for a new era. What I think I would like to see them do is kind of remake or, you know, spiritual remake the original game. Keep it simple, keep it boiled down to those simple characters and just exactly what Rampage really is, which is just 2D brawler dumb chaos. There is no other game like it for me personally, from just what it is and how it plays and how you walk around, you scoop up people and eat them, you punch cars, you climb up buildings, you smash buildings, and just cause a ton of chaos. Like there's nothing like that, but also just like the vibe and style to it all. The looks of these characters, the goofy sound effects when you do stuff, the music. There's not really anything like that, and I would love to see that brought up again. I mean, there are so many quirky, kind of weird AA indie games that pop off for a lot of reasons. I mean, people loved the chaos of Nidhogg and Nidhogg 2 and how goofy that 2D brawling can be, where it's like 1v1, to even like wackier stuff like Fall Guys. Fall Guys doesn't really like compare at all, but like I don't know why it comes to mind, where it's just like crazy simple concepts that can absolutely work. And I think for the Rampage games, for me always, it was beauty in simplicity. Playing with somebody else with your controller hooked up and just like walking around smashing cities and maybe even hitting or screwing over yourselves. Like it, I just love stuff like that. There was War of the Monsters and stuff, but really Rampage was it, man. And I think like a good, simple remake, a comeback of that could work for a certain group of players for sure. It doesn't need to be remade where it's like now every character has like an RPG skill tree and you can get loot and equip armor on them or anything like that. Like it could just be pretty straightforward, and I think it would still be really compelling. If they found a way to really make it kind of endless, and not in a games as a service way, but just kind of randomly generated endless fun entertaining levels and, you know, some more fun stuff to do in multiplayer modes, like I'd be into that. They made a movie. I forgot they made a movie. What was that about? Oh boy, another one that I definitely want to talk about that you've heard me talk about a lot, but I had to like definitely hash it out in one of these specific videos. It is The Darkness. The Darkness is one of my favorite early to mid 2000s games from the 360, PS3 era, and it is truly special. It's based on a comic book series that is just kind of a wild, weird thing with like New York City mafia stuff mixed with comic book over the top hell demon shit. And it's a really bad way of explaining it, but the original game is incredible. And in terms of it being remade, I think a lot of what makes it special is lightning in a bottle. Like it just kind of is. It's kind of like if you tried to remake like Chronicles of Riddick Escape from Butcher Bay. There was just something about that game, that time period, the way the graphics looked, the way everything felt, that made it special. And now it would just kind of feel not the same. So I guess for me, maybe for the Darkness, it kind of falls more into like a remaster territory, just like lovingly build that thing back up, rebuild it, so to speak. It could definitely use some better first-person shooting because Jesus Christ, that first one did not control great. But a lot of those Darkness abilities were so cool, and there is still some good gameplay in there, but it could be a little fresher. But the actual presentation, the story, the dialogue, all that stuff, I love it the way it is. I think it had really cool representations of New York City, just some cool mafia shit dialogue, and some real deep dives into some hellish stuff with a couple of really cool sequences in the game that are very, very unforgettable, for lack of a better word. The second game definitely does things a little bit differently. I think it's still great. The art style is a little different, but there's still a lot of potential for this series. And it just leads to more questions like, why don't we have more Spawn video games? Like, why don't we just have more gross dudes with spiky shit from the 90s in video games today? But now I'm starting to sound like an old head, so let's move on. The next one on my list, you probably maybe have seen this one coming. It's Mercenaries, dude. The original Mercenaries, Playground of Destruction, was something else. It released in 2005, and it was from Pandemic, the people behind stuff like Saboteur, of course, the Star Wars Battlefront games. And this was a LucasArts joint, back when they were making and still putting out weird stuff right until the very end. And Mercenaries certainly hasn't really aged well in some ways. The gameplay, the open world sandbox stuff is a little sparse nowadays, but there is something there for that to come back and be bigger and crazier. You, one of, I believe, 3 mercenaries, are dropped into an open world playground in North Korea where you fight off against all these different warring factions. Like there's like the UN, there's like a Russian mob, there's North Korea's forces themselves, and you're all clashing and you're doing all these missions and you're blowing stuff up, and you are just kind of like a quirky mercenary character with their own traits, kind of like their own specialties, and decent third-person shooting and a good amount of destruction. Buildings would absolutely collapse when you call in airstrikes on them, and it was cool to see all that go down. I just kind of gave you that feel of like an Earth Defense Force or a Red Faction just level of like stuff just collapsing and really falling apart. And that stuff with like a remake could really be brought up to be way more compelling, way more realistic, way more satisfying to just play and execute. But there's something about the original game that I would love to see carry over to a new thing, and that is tone. And it's something that the second game kind of missed. It went in a wackier direction, which I still liked, but the first game had this kind of cold thing to it. Maybe it was because you were dropped into like, you know, a communist country led by like this absolute tyrant, but like it just had this like cold, weird vibe to it that was like kind of epic and just nothing like another game. It's really, really hard to put my finger on. I don't know what it was. I think a lot of it had to do with the music. The game had 2 composers, Chris Tilton and some guy, I don't know, Michael Giacchino. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but the man behind the music of so many movies we watch today, from the Batman score to MCU movies and a bunch of stuff, was actually a really kick-ass video game composer back in the day who did tons of stuff. And Mercenaries' main theme is really, really memorable and orchestral and big sounding. It sounds like a movie, and I think that's what really helped sell a lot of the tone, because it was all over the place. Some of the, depending on the mercenary you picked, you could be a little quirky and strange, and you would like hijack tanks and do all this weird shit and blow up buildings. But the music really helped amplify the scale and make it feel like what you were doing was bigger and even crazier and more destructive. The 2000s, man, I don't know, like video game composers were on like some crazy type of drug with the stuff that they were putting out. I think it still rivals a lot of the stuff we see today in games. But I guess what I'm just trying to say is that Mercenaries, Playground of Destruction was really sick. I would love to see that original game like reborn, or they keep it going, dude. I mean, like with a kind of soft reboot. Mercenaries 2 was different, not totally what I wanted, but I thought it had some really cool ideas. And then they were planning to make a third game. EA was down at a point, but then they did what they did and they like shut down a studio. But hey, there's something there. Third person, open world, chaos, shooting, destruction. I mean, the check writes itself. But those are the ones I have time to touch on today. Of course, there's so many more I got to mention. Like I said in the last video, I still got to talk about The Punisher, still got to talk about Scarface, and a bunch more weird old stuff. So I just want to know from you guys in the comments, like, yes, we need more games, new ideas, fresh ideas. I absolutely agree with that. But if there were a couple of games you would like to see in a new light, newer graphics, or just kind of refreshed, reborn, remade, rebooted, whatever, what would it be? Definitely let me know. This is a really fun conversation. I loved hearing your guys' picks in the last comment section, so hit me up. If you like what I'm trying to do here, just talk about stuff I love, and today it tends to be some nostalgia, just some weird old games I used to love. Clicking the like button legitimately helps me. Thank you. If you are watching for the first time, or if you're a Patreon or YouTube membership person, however you're helping me out, I appreciate you very much. Thank you guys for being here, listening to me yap. I'm Jake Baldino. Subscribe because video games. Pizza's on me.